This segment, we're going to be talking about perception, primarily social perception and causal attributions. That is, what we perceive to cause the behaviors that we see. We will be talking about social perception first, and then we'll follow up with some information about the causes. Social perception is based on the goals of the perceiver. The goals of the perceiver are driven by the person's motivation. So what I see in a situation is in partly driven by my motivation. Further, the social context, for example, national culture might be a social context factor, or whether I'm at my business or if I'm at home. Social context is going to drive perception as well. And lastly, accessibility and memory, both prior and recent experience, are going to be important too. So let's talk a little bit about some differences in social perception and how they are created by a number of different factors in cognition and motivation. Social perception really focuses on our ideas about people, about other people. So sometimes a good example is going to be thinking about that all-important job interview. So we'll start with first impressions. As most people know, they're going to have a disproportional impact on how we see a new acquaintance or somebody that we're interviewing for a job. So that first impression is really important, and of course most people know that going into job interview settings. The issue is that once I have formulated an impression based on those things we just talked about, the goals that I have, the social context, and the accessibility and memory I have about perhaps people like you, people like the person I'm interviewing or meeting, once that impression has been formulated, I am likely to essentially close the gate for more information, and it's going to take a good bit of further interaction to get that to change. I don't know if you've ever had this experience. You meet somebody who looks a lot like a person you used to know. It becomes hard for you to separate those two impressions sometimes. You have to learn that the new person that you're just meeting is not like the old person necessarily, except for how they look. Another major influence that is tremendously important is how much we feel that we like the person that we're meeting or interacting with. So interpersonal attraction is very important. It's largely based on the similar to me or mirror image effect. That is, if this person seems to be like me, then I like them. So based on that premise, I should like people who are middle-aged white females from New Jersey, college professors, and so on. It's not quite that simplistic, of course, but you get the general idea. We like people who are like ourselves because anyone with a healthy self-image likes themselves. Therefore, we find people like us to be more attractive. We want to talk about stereotypes just for a minute. We hear an awful lot about it. We've learned about it since we were children. Stereotypes are generalized impressions of groups. That's a generalized impression of groups. If I have a stereotype, it's about a group. So middle-aged white females, I have an impression of that group. It's not about specific people. What happens, of course, is people generalize from that generalized impression to specific individuals. Here's a cartoon I like that relates to stereotyping, which I hope you'll also enjoy. The pointy-haired boss is saying, Dilbert, I'm sending you to diversity sensitivity training. Alice doesn't have to go because chicks are born already knowing this stuff. It's as natural as shopping and crying. And Dilbert says, can I get a Midol for either one of you, as Alice, who often likes to beat up on people, is beating up on the pointy-haired boss. Okay, so people don't necessarily like to be stereotyped is one thing we might take away from that. So our generalized impressions of groups are part of our cognitive processes, so it's not likely that we can get rid of them altogether. We can make them more complex. So for example, I can think about breaking down my stereotype of middle-aged white females into smaller boxes. There are middle-aged white females who work, who don't work, who have had certain kinds of experiences, mothers, grandmothers, etc. So I can start making smaller, finer perceptions out of my generalized interpretation. But this is generally how the cognitive process works. So it's very hard to just say, well, the answer is to get rid of stereotypes. So what we want, of course, is our stereotypes to be accurate, and of course they may not be. We learn plenty of things that are not exactly true or not true at all. And the next step would be to ask the question, can we apply these safely to individuals in the same category? We talked about this a little bit when we were talking about diversity and culture. When can we use this cultural information that we're learning? And the answer, of course, is, well, we want to use it essentially as a first best guess, but in employment practices, when we're looking at a set of job applicants, we have to be extremely careful in applying this at all. So here's a little diagram that I made up, although it is based in some reality, but the actual forms of these curves I made up that might demonstrate this just a little bit. So if we give a standard mechanical ability test to males and females, we'll get something like this. We don't know exactly what the shapes of those distributions are. They're nice bell-shaped curves here, but they might look a little bit different, flatter, for example. And we would see that the mean for females on mechanical ability will be smaller than the mean for males, so that the implication here is that females score lower on mechanical ability tests. But if we look at this diagram in terms of observing the overlap between the two curves, we're going to start thinking about what we would have to know in order to limit our pool of candidates for a mechanical job to males just on the basis of knowing this fairly accurate stereotype, somewhat accurate stereotype. So here's a piece of the diagram we need to focus on. If we look at the shaded in area, we can see that there are a number of females here, many females, who do better than the mean for males on this mechanical ability test. So if I'm trying to hire people to do a mechanical task, either in a manufacturing setting or in a Jiffy Lube or wherever it is, there's actually a number of females that might be very well capable of doing this job and in fact do it better than the average male. If we go back to some of the things we've said in other segments of the course, we can also remember that there may be other reasons why we want a mixed distribution of demographic characteristics within our organization besides focusing on this one characteristic, but that's something we'll put to the side for the moment. Here, the point is, if we just looked at the males in our application pool, we would be losing a lot of very well qualified females and keeping a lot of less qualified males. Okay, one last cartoon for this segment. In diversity sensitivity training, you will learn to respect those who are different. People basically fall into these four groups, and you can see what the groups are: ugly, smart, ugly, stupid, cute, stupid. Somebody in the audience is saying, this is different than I expected. And Dogbert is saying, I noticed that all of you are in this box here. We can guess which box that is, given that it's Dogbert saying that. Okay, so let's move on and talk a little bit about some other social perception influences. One of them is perceptual defense, which we're going to run into a great deal in organizations. When you tell somebody that they didn't do a good job, there's a lot of different interpretations they can put on this. This is an example, right? But when something is too threatening, feedback or an event or anything else is too threatening to the individual that's trying to interpret it, they're going to reinterpret it as something that's less threatening. So if you as a supervisor give negative feedback, one of the first things that is likely to happen is your employee is likely to be thinking, well, if he told me I did a bad job, then it's probably very likely that he doesn't know what he's talking about, because I know that I know what I'm talking about. So the problem here, of course, as we move on is going to be, how do we communicate negative feedback so that people can hear it? Because this is going to be the first step that they take. They're going to reinterpret it as the source is probably not a very good one. Another influence is body language. We need to be a little bit careful about this. Many people have talked about how to interpret body language. We're just going to stick with some very few basics here, including that we need to know the context, and it would be nice if we knew the person in order to interpret it. So if you know somebody who behaves in a particular way over and over and over, and all of a sudden they start behaving differently, then maybe that body language is going to be telling you something. We also know that situations situations in addition to habits are going to determine behavior. So the other thing that people overlook, of course, is that if I call you into my office and I'm the boss, you may be nervous. You may not have done anything wrong. You may be nervous. So we could see a lot of body language that tells us this person is nervous, but it doesn't tell us this person is guilty. So making sure that we have enough information to interpret the body language is really important. You also know that negative information is heavily weighted. So, for example, if I tell you that I'm not really very good at golf and I don't like golf or I don't watch golf, obviously that's not very socially desirable to say, because golf is the sport of business. It's a great way to get to know people and network and make deals on the golf course. If I tell you that I don't like it, that may be an indicator to you that I shouldn't be hired. Here's the issue, of course. Positive information is likely to be provided simply because it is socially desirable. So if I say, yeah, I like golf, how about that? I still like Tiger Woods despite what he did. Ernie Els, great guy, whatever. Arnold Palmer, I go way back with the game. That just may be making conversation as opposed to telling you anything meaningful. If I tell you I don't like it, it's assumed to be true because it's not socially desirable. The same would go for if you tell somebody, well, I can't type very fast, or I don't really understand how to use an Excel sheet. People are going to believe that because it's not socially desirable. Okay, so what causes behavior, at least in terms of our perceptions? Some of these are more likely to be accurate than others, but let's take a look. So internal attributions are a general category versus external attributions. In internal attributions, it's something about the actor that caused the behavior. So the actor is lazy or smart or motivated. All of those things would be internal attributions. External attributions, something about the situation caused the behavior. There was a traffic jam on I-26. There was a problem with the computer system. These are things that are outside of the control of the individual and therefore suggest different solutions for the behavior. We also might look at whether the attribution we're making is stable or not. So if you make a very stable attribution and it's for a bad type of performance, the cause of behavior is going to be very hard to change. So if you say this individual doesn't perform well because of his or her personality, you are really stuck because you've just attributed that bad behavior to something that you're not going to be able to change. So we'd like to focus on unstable attributions to the extent that it makes sense to do so, because unstable attributions are things that we can change, like motivation. The fact that the computer system went down. Those are actually things that we can have some influence over, and that's where we should focus our understanding of the causes of behavior. Now, keep in mind, behavior tends to be multiply caused, but if we spend all our time focusing on stable causes as opposed to unstable causes, we're not going to really get anywhere with it. Okay, so here's some rules that people tend to follow. Does this person act this way over time? That is, are they very consistent in their behavior? Are they always late? They're late for work every single day. Does this person act this way in other situations? Are they late for work? Are they late for meetings? Are they late for dates? Are they late for other appointments? Are they late to the airport? This would mean that the person is displaying indistinctive behavior. That is, the behavior is the same no matter what the situation. And lastly, do others act this way? If others act this way, well, then probably it's more likely to be something about the situation. So consistency points to the person. A lack of distinctiveness points to the person. And lastly, consensus is going to point to the situation. So what is the point here? If we actually utilize some of these rules, then we really are going to respond to bad performance in different ways. If the behavior is caused by the person, then the supervisor needs to address the person through training, rewards, punishments. If it's really about an external cause, none of those things are going to work. And the external cause should be addressed by removing obstacles, providing resources, and other things that change the situation in order to allow the employee to perform.